Good evening, ghouls and fiends. Welcome once again to another edition of the Ministry of Horror. I'm your host, Tez. Welcome once again. We're doing this live. It's the alternate week schedule as per, the new regime. Hope everyone's good. Hope everyone enjoyed last week's recorded show. The what was originally going to be a mixture of retro reviews and new reviews, turned out that I didn't get around to watching any new horror films, so it was kind of a mixture of retro and a couple of years old, and probably not old enough to be called retro, but certainly nowhere near new enough to be called new. You got that. You got a few reviews, but it was a review-centric show. So we're back once again on Twitch, twitch.tv/Tezis, if you are inclined to ever watch the live streams as they go out. So if people stuck around for the last live stream, we noticed something after the show had kind of finished and the recording had stopped, so audio listeners won't have, heard any of this stuff. But we watched what would now turn out to be our final watch party, which was Pumpkinhead, because Twitch have now removed the function to do watch parties, which is a real shame. Watch parties is kind of what got me onto doing things on Twitch, because I'm not that good at gaming and interacting, or just gaming in general, and the prospect of being able to watch films or TV shows with people online and just chat was always a good bit of fun. But yeah, that's gone now. So I think what's going to be happening is these live shows, we'll still do them live. I'll then stick around for a bit after the show's finished, the recording's finished, just for a little bit of a chat, because we do also talk a bit of wrestling on this channel. I don't do with any regularity the wrestling podcast anymore, just because of time. And so it's always a good little outlet during the watch parties for me to faff on about what I've thought of the wrestling, and obviously chat with the people in the chat about what they've thought of the latest wrestling. And obviously there's been a lot going on in the last 7 days, so I'll hang about and we'll have a little chit chat about wrestling after that. We've got Eddie the Beast in the chat. Hey Eddie, how's it going? Eddie said watched something earlier on, and it was Halloween Horror Nights, and it was a play where someone really did hit a razor's edge on someone onto a whole group of people. Jesus, that could go, well, like any wrestling move, that could go nasty very easily. But I'm sure they're professionals. I'm sure they knew what they were doing. So on tonight's show, we're going to be doing the latest in horror news, as we usually do. Okay, all right. Sorry, I just sidetracked by a message. Damn me, looking at my phone. We're going to do the usual horror news. We're going to be doing a few reviews today, varying qualities. The reviews, I will give you the heads up now, because I have them on my phone. We're going to be reviewing The Third Saturday in October, Part 5, Backcountry, and the newer film review is Night Swim. So they'll be coming up a bit later on. And then we're going to be doing our featured discussion point that we were going to do on the last live show, but we kind of ran out of time. It was a real chock-a-block show. We had the pre-recorded review segment with Lawrence. So I've kind of saved that for a bit of a discussion tonight. We're going to talk about legacy sequels in horror. So if you are unfamiliar with the term, a legacy sequel is essentially a term that's applied to horror film sequels that come out many years after either the original film, or at least after the last entry in the franchise. Now, sometimes that means it's a direct sequel to the last entry. Sometimes that means it's retconning the series, and it's a sequel to the first film or one of the earlier sequels. So we're going to have a little chat about legacy sequels in horror. I think it it could end up being a nice little companion piece to our straight-to-video 90s sequels piece that we did a little while ago. But that is the main kind of talking points for today's show. So, without further ado, let's get on to the latest in the horror news. Now, hopefully, this time I've actually got the levels right, so this audio will play, because I believe on the pre-recorded show, I hadn't checked that, and so no one heard the music, which is a damn shame. This is the news. There we go. This is the horror news, and the music worked. That's the main thing. So this is all coming from bloodydisgusting.com as per usual. There's write-ups from John Squires. The 6 new horror movies which are releasing this week, plus Chucky returns to TV. So first up, director Lawrence Fowler has been carving out his own little space on the indie horror scene with the Jack in the Box franchise, which began with 2019's The Jack in the Box and continued with 2022's The Jack in the Box Awakening. Up next, The Jack in the Box Rises. The brand new sequel comes to VOD and DVD today from 4 Digital Media. In his third installment, when Raven is sent to an all-girls boarding school, she unleashes a demon from a mysterious vintage Jack-in-the-Box hidden on the school grounds. Will the student make it out alive, or will the demon claim the victims it requires to remain alive? Nicholas Anscombe, Isabel Colby Brown, Leona Clark, Ollie Meredith, Anna Blackburn, Jade Groves and Georgina Conlon star in The Jack in the Box Rises. Now, I haven't seen the sequel. I haven't seen this trailer. I've slipped into my old routine of just not checking out the trailers before the show goes live and leaving it a bit late to get the show prepared. You know, I'm a creature of habit. But fun little fact. So I have seen the first Jack in the Box film. It is or was on Amazon Prime, and what initially drew me to watch it and to kind of search it out was because 2 of the makeup artists who worked on the film, super talented, Isabella Lata and I can't remember the other lady's name, which is really bad. They also did makeup effects on Harvest of the Dead Halloween Night, which is a little horror film sequel that I co-wrote and co-directed and co-played a killer in, along with Peter Goddard from a few years ago. It's available on Vipco. And don't know what's it called, Dark Fire, Dark Flame, Dark Flames releases in America. Don't know. Yeah, anyway. So, yeah, we were fortunate enough to have a makeup artist who'd worked on a film called The Jack in the Box, which is, it's pretty good. It's a pretty decent little indie horror. Not seen the sequel, and there's a third film. So, the first one is definitely worth the watch. I know that much. I can't comment on these 2. Next up, the same day, the Fallout TV. Okay, I need to mute my Alexa. Okay, it's muted. Apologies. The same day, I changed my Alexa and it still kicks off. The same day the Fallout TV series debuts on Prime Video. I've heard a lot of good things about it. I haven't watched any of it yet. Everyone's favourite killer doll returns with Chucky Season 3 Part 2 on both USA and Sci-Fi on Wednesday, April 10th. Season 3 Part 1 ends on a bombshell with a reveal that Chucky is dying of old age, and that looks to be the central storyline at play in Part 2. How will Chucky overcome this one? All the major players are back for Part 2 of Season 3, including Jennifer Tilly, Devon Sawyer, Brad Dourif, and Fiona Dourif. Preview for the new episodes is available on bloodydisgusting.com. Unlike previous seasons of Don Mancini's hit television series, new episodes of Chucky will be streaming the next day on Peacock. Good news for all you cord cutters out there. Eddie in the chat says he's an old doll now. Yeah, he's getting on a bit. Part of me does feel like I should finish season 2 of Chucky, you know, horror TV series. It's good to keep on top of these sort of things. It was becoming one of those shows where I was kind of like boredom watching, or going, I suppose I should watch I suppose I should watch the latest episode of Chucky. And, as soon as I'd started getting into the habit of what was occurring with, The Walking Dead, where I used to watch it every week, bam, 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 got to a point where I had like 6 or 7 episodes stored up, not from saving them, just because I couldn't be asked to watch. As soon as we've got to a point where for Chucky season 2, I had about 3 episodes, 3 weeks behind essentially, I just kind of thought, I'm okay. I'll live not knowing how season 2 resolves. Yet I'm fine. I'm fine with that. Next up in the new films, the feature debut of Dublin-based writer-director Paul Duane, All You Need Is Death, unfurls a haunting Irish folktale through ancient song. It's coming to VOD outlets on April 11th. In the film, a young couple are part of a mysterious secret organisation that travels at night with the desire to discover forbidden knowledge. They believe that living, modern alchemy is contained in old, forgotten songs. When they find a mysterious elderly woman who sings songs that have never been heard before, they open the door to ancient evil and madness. Olwen Furr, Charlie Mayer, Simone Collins, and Gary Whelan star in All You Need Is Death from XYZ Films. Interesting setup. Can't say I know too much about it. Eddie in the chat says it's always a young couple rather starts or ends a horror film. Well, yeah, that's always the way. I suppose there's the relatability element of it, but yeah, that's our usual setup. Fresh off the film premiere at South by Southwest, Nicolas Cage is back in RLJE Films' creature feature Arcadian, which arrives in theatres on February to April 12th. Friday, April 12th. It comes to Shudder later this year. In Arcadian, which looks to take a page out of A Quiet Place's playbook, after a catastrophic event depopulates the world, a father and his 2 sons must survive their dystopian environment while being threatened by mysterious creatures that emerge at night. Jaden Martell, Maxwell Jenkins, and Sadie Soverell all star in the upcoming Arcadian alongside cinema icon Nicolas Cage. Ben Brewer directed the film, written by Mike Nylon. Megan Navarro recently reviewed it for Bloody Disgusting and wrote, playing like a cross between a poignant coming-of-age story and intense survival horror, Arcadian does just enough to set itself apart from similar fare. However, its ultimate appeal and magic lie in the inventive monster designs and the thrilling action set pieces that inspire. Nicolas Cage, a horror-adjacent type film. I'll be checking it out. Next up, Larry Fassenden is back with new werewolf horror movie Blackout, which Dark Sky Films is bringing to digital VOD at home on Friday, April 12th. Blackout marks the second pairing of Glass Eye Pix, the New York production shingle. The New York production shingle, headed by Fassenden and Yellow Veil Pictures, having previously collaborated successfully on world sales for Fessenden's 2019 Depraved, which was released by IFC Midnight in the US. The film follows small-town artist Charlie, a tortured man whose drinking binges blur with his sneaking suspicion that he might likely be a werewolf. He distances himself from those he loves and sinks deeper into solitude, his flashes of memory of his nighttime grisly acts manifested through his artwork. Blackout is the third film in Fessenden's monster trilogy, following Habit, about vampires, and Depraved, about Frankenstein. This film continues his theme of critiquing the monster inside all people and using excellent practical effects to boot. In addition to Hurt, cast includes Addison Timlin, James LaGrosse, Kevin Corrigan, Barbara Crampton, Joe Swanberg, and many others. It's a decent cast, that. I don't think I've seen Depraved. I don't know if I've seen Habit. I mean, that could be quite a run-of-the-mill title, but yeah, I don't know. I don't think I've actually seen any of Fessenden's movies. One to watch, perhaps. And then, we've still got a few more. Jesus. And then writer-director Kian Roach-Turner will unleash arachnophobia-inducing terror this week with Sting, which Well Go USA is bringing to theatres on Friday, April 12th. The film features practical spider effects from 5-time Academy Award winner Weta Workshop, led by creative director Richard Taylor, Ryan Kaur, Alia Brown, Penelope Mitchell, Robin Nevin, Noni Hazelhurst, and Jermaine Fowler star. In Sting, one cold stormy night in New York City, a mysterious object falls from the sky and smashes through the window of a run-down apartment building. It is an egg, and from this egg emerges a strange little spider. The creature is discovered by Charlotte, a rebellious 12-year-old girl obsessed with comic books. Despite her stepfather Ethan's best efforts to connect with her through their comic book co-creation Fangirl, Charlotte feels isolated. Her mother and Ethan are distracted by their new baby and are struggling to cope, leaving Charlotte to bond with the spider. Keeping it as a secret pet, she names it Sting. As Charlotte's fascination with Sting increases, so does its size. Growing at a monstrous rate, Sting's appetite for blood becomes insatiable. Neighbours' pets start to go missing, and then the neighbours themselves. Soon Charlotte's family and the eccentric characters of the building realise that they are really trapped, hunted by a ravenous supersized arachnid with a taste for human flesh, and Charlotte is the only one who knows how to stop it. So the trailers for Sting actually look like it could be pretty fun. I will definitely want to give this a watch. It may be a solo trip to the cinema, but I think it looks like it could be quite a fun creature feature. I mean, who doesn't want to see an enormous spider terrorizing a apartment block? And then I think finally, in the new film releases, the chilling Spanish-language horror film Disappear Completely premiered at Fantastic Fest to critical acclaim, and we've learned that it's quietly coming to Netflix on Friday, April 12th. Directed by Luis Javier Henane, the film stars Harold Torres, Titi Espinosa, Fermin Martinez, Vicky Arroyo, Norma Reyna, and Quetzali Cortez. After visiting a crime scene, an ambitious and insensitive tabloid crime photographer falls victim to a mysterious illness that makes him lose his 5 senses one by one. Now that's a true nightmare. Eddie in the chat says, I was thinking of making a horror film called Sting, but can't dream anymore. Oh, there's plenty of films with the same title, so let's still go ahead and do it. You don't have a copyright on film titles, or they don't have a copyright on film titles, I should say, so don't let that stop you. So that is it for the new horror film releases of this week. If anything takes your fancy, be sure to check it out and let us know on X or Twitter at ministry_horror your thoughts on that film. And if I get around to watching it, I'll be sure to review it on a future episode. So, next up in the news, Glenn Powell has been cast to star in a new adaptation of King's The Running Man from director Edgar Wright. This is from John Squires by Disgusting. Originally reported way back in 2021, Edgar Wright, who people will know from Shaun of the Dead and Last Night in Soho, is directing a new take on Stephen King's The Running Man. Paramount has announced out of CinemaCon today that Glenn Powell will star. Glenn Powell is known for Top Gun Maverick and the upcoming Twisters. Edgar Wright will direct the brand new movie adaptation of Stephen King's novel, and he will also produce, along with his producing partner Nira Park and Simon Kinberg. King's novel, published under the pseudonym Richard Bachman, was released in 1982, loosely adapted into the same titled Arnold Schwarzenegger starring film in 1987. So I have seen the film, the Arnold Schwarzenegger film, and I'm aware that the novel that it is based on is meant to be quite different, which shouldn't be surprising, as adaptations more often than not deviate a fair amount from the source material. Sometimes for good measure, for necessity, and other times, God, who knows why. But I believe I do have I do have a collection. I think The Running Man is in. I've got the Bachman books, which is a paperback collection of some, not all, of the books released under the pseudonym Richard Bachman, which was Stephen King. I mean, new adaptations of Stephen King novels, it's kind of always been a bit of a mixed bag. We hit a good little run recently of, It, Chapter 1 specifically, I would say. Dr. Sleep. I'm sure there's a couple of others. Mr. Harrigan's Phone on Netflix was pretty good, but then along with that, there's always a few stinkers. That's just the way things go, unfortunately. So, I guess it would help if I've read the book to know if I think that this is, well, not so much that if this is doable or not, because I'm assuming, Stephen King's works are never really that far out there that you couldn't do them. I mean, there's moments which you shouldn't do, but in terms of the general scope of the actual novel, it's, doable in most senses. Yeah. Okay, well, I'm going to hold judgment. I mean, Edgar Wright's a great director. Glenn Powell seems to be in everything at the moment. A good thing, a bad thing, I don't know. Haven't seen enough of his work to know if he's a good actor or not. Top Gun Maverick, he kind of played a similar role to everyone else in that film. It's fine. It's an action film where everyone's chads and bros. But yeah, we shall see. Now, for fans of found footage horror, Blumhouse and Lionsgate joined forces for a brand new The Blair Witch Project movie. Again, John Squires, BlokeDiscussing.com. 25 years after the release of the original genre-changing classic, Lionsgate and Blumhouse announced out of CinemaCon today that they will partner on the development and production of a new The Blair Witch Project movie as the first film in a multi-picture pact with Blumhouse reimagining horror classics from the Lionsgate library. The announcement was made today by Adam Fogelson, Chair Lionsgate Motion Picture Group, and Jason Blum, founder and CEO of Blumhouse. Based at Universal Pictures, where it has a first-look deal, Blumhouse is the gold standard in the horror space, generating blockbuster results from a string of modestly budgeted films, including the Paranormal Activity franchise, Insidious, The Purge, Sinister, Halloween, Five Nights at Freddy's, and Megan, along with award-winning Get Out and Black Klansman. Blumhouse films have grossed nearly $6 billion at the worldwide box office. Blum will team with producer Roy Lee on the new Blair Witch Project movie. Lee previously produced the 2016 film Blair Witch, the most recent installment in the franchise. I've been incredibly fortunate to work with Jason many times over the years. We forged a strong relationship on The Purge when I was at Universal, and we launched STX with his film The Gift. There is no one better at this genre than the team at Blumhouse, said Fogelson. We're thrilled to kick this partnership off with a new vision for Blair Witch that will reintroduce this horror classic for a new generation. We couldn't be more pleased with working with them on this and other projects we look forward to revealing soon. I'm very grateful to Adam and the team at Lionsgate for letting us play in their sandbox. I'm a huge admirer of the Blair Witch Project, which brought the idea of found footage horror to mainstream audiences and became a true cultural phenomenon, said Blum. I don't think there would have been a Paranormal Activity had there not first been a Blair Witch, so this feels like a truly special opportunity and I'm excited to see where it leads. Found footage masterpiece The Blair Witch Project changed the game back in 1999, subsequently spawning its own sprawling universe of media, including official follow-up films in 2000 and 2016, as well as multiple books and video games that have deepened the lore. I'm a big fan of The Blair Witch Project, and I also quite enjoy Blair Witch. I like what they tried to do with that film. I liked the connection to the first film, a lot more so than Book of Shadows, Blair Witch Project 2, which I've seen once. Once was enough. It was terrible. Going for this sort of semi-meta approach, I've never really been that big of a fan of meta. It's not for me. It always kind of seems to be sticking two fingers up at the source material or the original entry, and I just don't like that. But yeah, the 2016 Blair Witch, I thought was a pretty smart film. It didn't hit it out the park. I don't know if it was because of it being a larger cast or the actors involved, or what, but it did sort of feel a little bit more bros and chumps and whatever in the woods and get picked off one by one, and that did sort of happen to a degree, but I find that when you get to horror sequels, when you start having larger groups than the original, or I can't even remember how many of them there were, but it certainly felt like a much larger group than the original trio. On one hand, that gives you the opportunity for a bit of a body count, some bloodshed perhaps, or some creepy moments. But on the other hand, you're then kind of just giving us expendable characters who are, if not well written or developed, going to be just deemed as instantly expendable. And so therefore you're not really invested or interested into what's going on there. One of the key things with the original Blair Witch was you felt the paranoia of the characters, and there's been so many theories over the years, and you only get theories with interest and intrigue. Theories as to that the guys in the group had basically planned to murder Heather and led her out there, and when one of them went missing, he wasn't missing. It was kind of part of the setup. There's other ones of alternate ideas of how the film should have ended. There's alternate endings and so on. But you never really got that kind of same level of interest with Blair Witch, because I think kind of partly down to the characters. No one stood out to me as particularly bad, per se, but it whilst I found it enjoyable, not that I necessarily think that you're never going to hit the levels of the first film. It's definitely possible, but you got to have the characters right, and the motivations were there in terms of the connection to the first film. But yeah, it had a couple of cool moments, some cool deaths, and the finale was fine. It played around with some themes, and it created its own kind of questions, or partially answered some questions from the first film, whether you want to look into it like that. But yeah, I'm down for some more Blair Witch. I'd be interested to see. I would have been interested to see what the original filmmakers Daniel Myrick and Eduardo Sanchez would have done with it, because I know that in the past, I'm sure that they've pitched ideas for a sequel. For whatever reason, Lionsgate, whoever, haven't picked them up on it. Now, it could just be because they hit, gold first time around, and subsequent ideas have just been subpar, perhaps, But you have to always feel that the people that know the lore or the sandbox the best are going to be the creators, naturally. But yeah, I'm interested. Next up, Rob Zombie teases House of a Thousand Corpses book with rare photos, original script, and more. This is John Squires again. Rob Zombie's debut horror feature, House of a Thousand Corpses, just celebrated its 20th anniversary last year, and Zombie has taken to Instagram this week to announce that a brand new making-of book will be joining last year's Blu-ray re-release as part of the celebration. Zombie writes this afternoon, to celebrate the 21st anniversary of House of a Thousand Corpses being released. I thought I would give you a sneak peek at the House of a Thousand Corpse book that I've been working on. This thing is packed with rare photos, blueprints, storyboards, makeup tests, and my original script with all my handwritten notes and sketches. Coming your way soon, Zombie notes an Instagram post which includes a series of rare behind-the-scenes photographs that will be appearing in the upcoming making-of book. The photos from Zombie's personal collection feature stars Sid Haig, Bill Moseley, and Sherry Moon Zombie, taking us behind the scenes of the film's production. You'll also find a hand-drawn early sketch of the character who became known as the Professor, along with a couple of shots that show Walter Phelan getting into costume as the iconic Dr. Satan. We expect the upcoming book will feature a whole lot more of these relics from Zombie's archives, and we'll be sure to keep you posted as we learn more about its release. Stay tuned. So House of a Thousand Corpses was released 21 years ago. God, that is mad. That ages me. I remember reading in... It wouldn't be Fangoria because we don't get Fangoria in the UK. But it must have been maybe Starburst or Dark Times, something like that. There's a few kind of horror label magazines which we've had in the past. Don't necessarily know if they are still in publication. But I remember, might have even been Empire, maybe at Halloween sort of time, hearing about this film stuck in developmental hell from Rob Zombie. And at that time, I was like becoming a bit of a Rob Zombie fan. I'd been getting into metal in my sort of early teen years, and I'd heard Dragula by Rob Zombie, and I was like instantly a fan of that. I then discovered that he had a band before called White Zombie and loved that stuff even more. So to see that he was working on a horror film, especially after you see some of the White Zombie and Rob Zombie videos that he directed, you instantly get an idea for his visual style being very, very mixture of B-movie, over the top aesthetics and costume designs mixed with kind of real terror. And yeah, I recently did a bit of a rewatch of House of a Thousand Corpses a couple of months back, and it is much better than I remember it. Which I'd always felt that House of a Thousand Corpses was decent, pretty full on in places, but decent. And then Devil's Rejects was his kind of best release. But I haven't gone back to rewatch Devil's Rejects in a very long time. And House of a Thousand Corpses does hold up a lot better from memory. And I think you appreciate it more having seen his later output, where it's the, I mean, we've talked about it so much, but it's the characters, the dialogue that lets it down. You know, I wonder, without rewatching Devil's Rejects, I wonder if maybe Halloween was the turning point when it came to characters and dialogue, where things just sort of took a bit of a southward turn. And, you know, being able to separate those types of characters from projects was becoming harder and harder, perhaps. But everything just took a real sort of grimy downward turn, unfortunately. But I'm going to be keeping an eye out for when this book comes out, because that does sound pretty interesting, and I do love a good behind the scenes book, good art book. Yeah. Next up, so fans of Takeshi Mike, Lumberjack the Monster. Takeshi Mike's serial killer versus psychopath thriller heads to Netflix this summer. This comes from Megan Navarro. A prolific genre filmmaker, Takeshi Mike, who did Audition, which is fucked up, and Ishi the Killer, which is also really fucked up, is back with The Lumberjack the Monster, an adaptation of Kaibutsu no Kikuri by Mayusuke Kurai, and it's heading to Netflix this summer. It's going to be a battle to the death between a serial killer and a psychopath. Lumberjack the Monster will make its North American premiere at May 6th at the Japan Society in partnership with Tribeca Festival's Escape from Tribeca, ahead of its Netflix debut on June 1st, 2024. Excuse me. In the film, Akira Ninomiya is a remorseless lawyer who doesn't hesitate to eliminate anyone who stands in his way. One night, he is brutally attacked by an unknown assailant wearing a monster mask. Although he miraculously survives the assault, Ninomiya becomes fixated on finding the attacker and getting revenge. Meanwhile, a series of gruesome murders occur where the victims are found with their brains removed from their bodies. While police conduct an intensive investigation, Ninomiya seeks revenge against the assaulter, who will uncover the truth first. Hiroyoshi Kaiwai wrote the screenplay. Oh, God, I mean, so I've not seen any later Takeshi Mike. I don't know if he's calmed down the brutality or if it's upped the ante a lot, but so the first film of his I saw was Itchy the Killer. It was one of those things where the artwork was what you kind of saw first, and I had a friend at school who was really into their anime and then subsequently their world cinema and J horror, J horror, K horror. Really sort of got me onto things like Ring, which I finally got my Ring box set, and some of these more kind of extreme entries. And they may have actually lent me both Itchy the Killer and a few years later Audition, perhaps, because I don't own Audition. I don't think it's been on any streaming sites that I've noticed. But Itchy the Killer is just... There's so many moments in the film, and I believe it's based on a manga or a novel. Not sure. I think Audition's based on a novel. But Itchy the Killer has so many moments where I was just like... I want to see how the story ends, but I also just want it to end because it's an assault. An Audition is really good. It's a film of so one half love story drama, the other half building tension until a terrifying finale. So yeah, and he did a Masters of Horror episode, which we did try and stream on the RIP watch parties. We did try and stream a couple of episodes, and man, the quality was very late 90s, early 2000s TV horror. You know, where budgets were maybe a lot smaller, production values were a lot worse. And we didn't get to Imprint because I don't think Imprint was on Prime. Imprint, I think, may have been Series 1. I think we had Series 2 available to stream. And it's an episode which was subsequently banned in America because it's, again, he does extreme horror. It's full on, but he does it to a high standard. I mean, I've read or listened to an audiobook of a novel which was deemed extreme horror, like, oh, if you like horror, this will turn your stomach. And the book was called The Summer I Died. Heard all this, fanfare about how oh man, it's brutal. Yeah, it doesn't necessarily mean it's good. And listening to the audiobook of it, I got like 2 hours in and thought, I don't really care how brutal the events are going to be in this book because the writing is just so bad. I mean, there's a whole like 20 minutes opening where the person doing the narration does like this introduction to how cool the author is. And I just thought, don't want to get that in Stephen King books. Doesn't have to pat himself on the back. Never has. Yeah. So what the point of that is that, being brutal for the sake of it is one thing. Being brutal and artistic is another. Doesn't necessarily mean you can stomach either of them, but it's just to give you an idea. Let's move on. We've got one more bit of news before we move on to our reviews. Smile 2 plot details have been announced. The horror sequel will follow a pop star afflicted by the smile curse. This comes from John Squires by Disgusting. Paramount's hit horror movie Smile gets a sequel this Halloween with returning director Parker Finn's Smile 2. And the first plot details have made their way out of Paramount's CinemaCon presentation this afternoon. The first footage from the upcoming sequel was shown off at the event, but unfortunately it is not yet being released for the rest of us online. The good news, a whole bunch of websites, including Slash Film, were on hand at CinemaCon this week, so we've at least got Smile 2 footage description to work with now. Slash Film recaps what they saw. The teaser footage for Smile 2 that played at CinemaCon was focused on the new character played by Naomi Scott, a music celeb whose glamorous world is about to get dragged to hell. After a few glimpses of her pop star performances, the footage showed Scott's character getting a shock when a man, played by Lucas Gage, breaks into her dressing room and smiles creepily at her. Elsewhere in the footage, the website's description of the CinemaCon footage continues. She is confronted by a kid with braces who flashes her a similar malevolent smile. The announced cast for Smile 2 also includes Kyle Gallner, Rosemary DeWitt, Lucas Gage, and Dylan Guilala, alongside Raul Castillo and Miles Gutierrez Riley. Smile 2 is scheduled to hit theatres on October 18th, 2024. Parker Finn signed a multi-year first look deal with Paramount Pictures in the wake of Smile striking it big at the box office, and a sequel to the film was the first order of business. Stay tuned for more on Smile 2 as we learn it. The first film scared up a whopping $217 million worldwide in 2022, all but ensuring that a sequel wouldn't be too far behind. Okay, I'm pretty excited for that. I think with the original Smile, it is decent. It is worth a watch. I would definitely say if you were on the fence about Smile, give it if you've seen it and you were like, it's all right, give it a rewatch. But I would also recommend first watching Laura Hasn't Slept Lately, which is the short film which led to Smile being made, and it features the same actress who I believe also played the character Laura at the start of the film. And I kind of discussed at the time that I did the review of Smile that it is good. It's got some nice jump scares here and there. It has a couple of creepy moments, and I think the finale is very good. Like the finale is that was some creepy shit, and I liked that. Some people didn't like it, but for me, like I liked the reveal as it kind of came to the climax of the film. That being said, I did also feel that for a film based around these creepy smiles, part of this kind of curse and this thing following you around, that I've seen creepier smiles and other things. And that is still true, and that is still to be the case. That yeah, I have kind of just seen other films do the creepier, kind of more elongated smile, and it could be that just these weren't elongated smiles and nothing was artificial about them. I don't know. But that being said, I'm excited to see how this will continue. Also, that we're getting Kyle Gallner back from the first Smile. You have to assume that he is going to. I mean, a bit of a spoiler alert here, but you have to assume he is probably going to die early on in the film, or if not, become some form of hermit who has figured out some way to defer it. But yeah, seeing his back, I imagine it may not be for long, or maybe a small role. Still good though. Yeah, quite interested to see this, and it's coming out in October, right up in time for Halloween. So I'll be definitely making sure to watch that at the cinema. Anyway, Ghouls and Fiends, that is it for the horror news. That was the news. Oh. There we go, horror news. So that brings us nicely on to our little review section. So let's hit that review music. And the first film we're going to review, and believe me, this is going to be a short review, is The Third Saturday in October, Part 5. This is now on Shudder in the UK. This came up on my new films on Shudder. And I admit, for a moment, I was thinking, this is actually a franchise that I've not heard of. Huh? But no, this is the supposed lost sequel from, I think, 1994 to a forgotten horror franchise, The Third Saturday in October. This film was directed and written by Jay Burleson, starring Kansas Bowling, Poppy Cunningham, Taylor Smith, and it follows an implacable killer as he stalks and butchers the occupants of houses across the stretch of one lone country road while the residents prepare to watch a yearly college football bout. Okay. I'm going to start off by saying I'm going to start off by saying I do understand what they are going for with this film. It is, I don't know if it's satire, I'd say it's a parody. It's a parody of the churned out horror franchises and sequels for the sake of it. And by the fifth part of these sort of franchises, the acting and the kills do get, more ridiculous and silly and preposterous and outright bad. But oh man, this was so bad. Like it wasn't poking fun in a way where you're in on the joke and it's funny. Like, it's poking fun and you are in on the joke in terms of knowing that, okay, quite quickly you can realise that this is not the fifth part in the franchise and this wasn't released in 1994, as it says. I think it's 1994. But this is, in fact, a new film mocking that. And that's fine. I've got no problem with mocking dodgy 90s fifth sequels like Children of the Corn Part 5 and all of that stuff. And they are bad as well. But making a film purposefully purposefully trying that. I don't know. It it's almost like trying to do Scary Movie without the jokes. There's moments with there's this little girl who just loves to dance, and with a few different characters, she's like, "Hey, I can teach you how to dance," and then she's there doing the night fever disco finger thing, and there's a guy in a wheelchair at one point just punching his hands in the air, and these moments happen quite often. It feels like, and for a prolonged period, and again, I get it. I get it that this is, it is essentially a parody, but fucking hell, it's difficult to watch. Like the kills, again, I get that they feel as part of the time of the mid-90s, but it would work if it was funny, but it's just not funny. So you're then just left with a really bad horror film. I try to give pros and cons or ups and downs, and that's okay. But gosh, I just really didn't like this. This may be the lowest score, maybe, in Ministry of Horror history, perhaps. Oh shit, moving the wrong bit. I'm giving it 2.5 out of 10. I just can't in good faith give it a higher score. And I think the 0.5 is like a bit of a pat on the head because it's going for that kind of mockery of mid-90s sequels. And I can appreciate that because I do enjoy what are essentially terrible sequels released in the mid-90s or even early 2000s. I do enjoy them, although I know that they are bad films. This is just a bad film. It's on Prime if you fancy watching it, but yeah, 2.5 out of 10 for the third Saturday in October, part 5. Next up, this is a film that came out a couple of years ago. Well, no, 10 years ago. Fuck. So it's another oldie film. But this is a much different experience, it has to be said, to the last film. Me and my girlfriend watched Backcountry. This is currently available on Freevee on Prime. So if you have Freevee or as a channel on, I don't know whatever streaming platform you use, or just through Prime. It's a 2014 Canadian nature survival horror film written and directed by Adam McDonald, making his feature film directorial debut. It's loosely based on the true story of a hungry man-eating black bear that attacked Mark Jordan and Jacqueline Perry in the backcountry of Missinaba Lake Provincial Park north of Chapleau, Ontario in 2005, events for which Mark later received the Star of Courage Award from Governor General Michel Jean. So this film stars Missy Peregrine, who I can't remember what I recognise her from. I think she might have been in, I want to say she was in Smallville. Well, I don't think she was. She was in the TV series FBI, but I've never actually seen FBI. She's in Pyewacket, which is pretty decent actually, as a voice role. Smallville, she's in one episode. I'm sure. Oh, okay, she was in Reaper. There you go. She was in the TV series Reaper. Never recognised her from something. So, the film follows Alex and his girlfriend Jenny, who arrive at the provincial park to go camping for the weekend in hopes of exploring a trail he loved when he was younger. Alex, played by Jeff Roop, and this does also feature Eric Balfour, who's been in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre remake, early episodes of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, has done a few things. Alex refuses a map from the park ranger, confident that he knows the park well. On the first night they set up camp, they encounter an Irish tour guide named Brad, who Jen invites to have dinner with them. Brad flirts with Jen, much to Alex's annoyance, and the two confront one another, and Brad leaves. The following morning, Alex decides to go off-trail, deep into the park, where he remembers there is a lake with a waterfall. On the way, he sees a bare paw print in the ground, but does not alert Jen. They also discover a half-eaten deer carcass. And things essentially from this point go south. When they realise that they are not on the route that they thought they were on. And you can kind of put two and two together when it comes to a survivalist film, including a bear. Now, the first thing that this film is going to get knocked down for on the score for, whether this is due to the filmmakers themselves, maybe it's a mixing issue with Freevee and it has nothing to do with the release of the film, but the audio mixing for this film was absolutely terrible. So to kind of put into context, quite often, I don't know if you guys have ever had this issue. I used to have a nice sound bar. It's in my closet somewhere, but I don't bother in my Ministry of Horror HQ with the sound bar. We don't bother downstairs with the sound bar. Both TVs have got decent sound. It's fine. But we normally don't need to have the TV in the living room above a volume of like 20%, 22%. You know, it's loud enough as is. At times, we had to have the volume at 75% for this film because the dialogue was so quiet and the music was either a little bit louder than dialogue or flipping blaringly loud. Now, I've had the issue before for many years where films, TV shows are released to streaming or home release, whatever, designed for home media setups. So they're designed for 5.1, 7.1 surround sound. And that's great, that's fine. But sometimes what can happen with that is you have most typically dialogue audio being quite quiet. So you turn the volume up, and then music cues come in, and it's like, oh, fucking hell. And I got into a period when I was younger, just watching things with subtitles on all the time, just because if you've got subtitles on and you can sort of hear the dialogue, then you can make sense of it easy enough because you've got the visual cue. And then that way you don't have to quickly turn the volume down from deafening yourself, or, you know, if you're living at home, deafening other people in other rooms. So that became a bit of a thing. Neither of us were very impressed with the audio mixing. That could be the film itself, that could be a streaming issue, who knows. But with this film, we get this nice build-up with this couple. There's clearly some tension here. Alex, actually, seems like he could be a bit of an uptight prick. You feel quite bad for Jen for a good part of it because she's trying to go along. She's trying to be invested in something she's not that interested in. This is very much Alex's thing, although he has his reasons for that, which I'm sure if you put two and two together of a couple going hiking to a really pleasant spot, you know, you do the math there and you can kind of work out what the intentions are. But when we then get introduced to the bear, holy fuck, does this film do tension quite well. It really does. There's a moment where the bear is sniffing around outside their tent, and you're just thinking, fuck, it's going to come in. And there's another moment where they're looking out the front of their of the tent, and the bear spots them and starts approaching, and it's an actual bear. I mean, when it comes to a moment with a bear attack, then it's clearly like a animatronic bear for the moments that you do see, but that shouldn't be taken as a negative, because the moments where you then see the bear itself in full view, like it's a flipping massive black bear, it is pretty creepy, and we get one of the most kind of, I suppose, realistic bear attacks in a film. Like, a particular character, and this shouldn't be too much of a spoiler, it happens just after the sort of halfway point, but a particular character gets attacked and dragged out of the tent. And you only get glimpses of the attack as it's happening, but you get all the audio. And that is harrowing enough, tearing, ripping sounds and whatnot. And when you do get the brief glimpses, like the person involved, like their face is half gone and things just being ripped up. And you get a moment seeing the remains with the bear kind of there, looking happy as Larry. And it is awful because it's not just a case of the person's been pulled out and killed, or they've been partially eaten. Like a bear attack isn't just going to maul and kill you. It's, I'm going to eat you for sustenance. It's horrible. But in terms of as a survival film, this is pretty good, actually. It is definitely one of the better ones. I mean, I normally view creature feature sort of animal attack films with a bit of apprehension. If it's going into it with a bit of a sci-fi element, it's playing up tongue-in-cheek, then okay, yeah, there's potential to have fun there. Anaconda, dodgy CGI aside, is pretty fun. Alligator is really good from the 80s. But there's also a ton of terrible ones, as we all know. But this is one I'd never heard of. I mean, it ended 71k at the box office, but I don't know if it found an audience later on in home media. But it is definitely one worth a watch. If you like a creature feature animal attack film and you have, well, Freevee is free. There's no sign up as far as I'm aware. So if you're in the UK at least, you can check it out on Freevee. I'm going to give it a 6. I'm going to give it a 6 out of 10. I think this could have been a 7, but the experience is just really hampered by the audio. And that may be a Freevee thing, not a film thing. Like if I picked up a home media release of this, I may find that issue isn't there, but I can base it on the experience that I had, and it was really distracting. So, could be maybe I give it a 6.5. I'm going to stick with a 6. It's pretty good. It is pretty good. 6 out of 10 for Backcountry. And then finally, one of the newer films being released, Night Swim. Finally got around to watching Night Swim. Missed it at the cinema. I do try and go to the cinema, although I'm probably going to end up missing The First Omen. I just don't see if I'm going to get myself down to the cinema in the next couple of weeks before payday. And the cinema isn't cheap, so I think, we'll keep an eye out on future releases, but First Omen may be a home release watch. But Night Swim I missed at the cinema, and it's now available to rent on Prime for £5, or you can purchase it digitally for a tenner. But £5, that's fine. Can easily deal with that for a rental, no problemo. Night Swim is a 2024 supernatural horror film written and directed by Bryce Maguire in his feature directorial debut and based on the 2014 short film of the same name by Maguire and Rod Blackhurst. Stars Wyatt Russell and Kerry Condon. It follows a suburban family who discover that their backyard swimming pool is haunted. Jason Blum and James Wan produced the film under their Blumhouse Productions and Atomic Monster banners, respectively, and this marks the first film from the two companies to be released following their merger in January 2024. Night Swim was released in the United States by Universal Pictures on January 5th, 2024. In 1992, a young girl, Rebecca Summers, goes out to her family pool one night to retrieve a toy boat belonging to her terminally ill brother, Tommy. While she tries to get the boat, something in the pool pulls her underwater. In the present day, the Waller family, Ray, Eve, and children Izzy and Elliot, are seeking a new permanent residence after Ray has been forced to retire from his baseball career due to illness. They decide to purchase a house with a swimming pool in the backyard, especially after hearing that the pool would be good for Ray's condition. Ray scratches his hand while working to clear out the pool in the backyard. When the pool maintenance come to inspect it, they reveal that the pool is essentially self-sustaining, taking its water from an underground spring in the area. So Wyatt Russell, son of Kurt Russell, is kind of front and center for this film. And he does a pretty good performance, I would say, in this, of a man who kind of all he's known his whole life is sports. And you generally do find with professional sports athletes, they've kind of been in that world since childhood. I'm not sure what he's a baseball player in this film. I'm not sure the baseball scouting system is like, but you know, in soccer or football, essentially, if you are going to be a pro player, then it seems that you're kind of scouted and put into like a youth teams, and you know it's all through those systems that you then get up into the top tier teams. So essentially, that's kind of all he's known. But he's now got this debilitating illness, which is causing him to have these headaches. He, can't really walk far without a cane, and it's really kind of put him on the back foot. And the whole family have been used to having to move regularly, because if you're a pro athlete, you get traded from one team, one part of the country to another, so you're moving all about. So it's you don't really have a stability there. He does a good performance. The kids do quite well in this. Also, Kerry Condon as the wife is pretty good in this. And the concept initially does seem a little bit ridiculous, a haunted swimming pool, but you have to kind of think it's no more ridiculous than a haunted house. Because the whole kind of gist with haunted houses is someone died in this location and their spirit, due to the circumstances, can't move on. And therefore, they're tied to the location. So if you kind of just take that thinking going into it, well, pools, like any form of source of water, can be dangerous. People can drown. It happens. Accidents can occur. It is something that, and if that were to happen, and let's say the afterlife is real, then why couldn't that be a location of hauntings, perhaps? So when I started thinking that way, because initially when this film was released, I kind of thought, haunted pool, what? But when you start taking that approach, it doesn't seem that ludicrous. With this though, is it good? It's okay. It's okay. There's some pretty decent swimming moments where the bottom of the pool seems a hell of a lot deeper than the pool actually should be, and there's reasons for that. The explanation, which obviously I won't go into here, there's no spoilers in these reviews. The explanation as to what is causing it, I think, okay, that makes some sense. Just think kind of tying into the self-sustaining pool, reasons behind that. Okay, I can understand that. I'll just say folklore. I can understand that. But some of the scares, there's some good moments of tension. There's some good kind of, I suppose the phenomena is like corner of the eye phenomena, where you got some moments where the characters are either underwater or they're sort of just coming out of the water and peering over the top, and the vision's a bit blurry from, I guess, like the chlorine in the pool or whatnot. But in that blurry vision, you can sort of see the silhouette of someone there, or sort of see an image of someone stood nearby, or who you think is someone stood nearby. Those moments are okay. They're pretty good for kind of building up a bit of creepiness. But then there's other moments with kind of dodgy CGI ghosts. I'll just say ghosts because that is kind of what we've got to base it on. That do look shonky as hell, which is a bit of a shame. There's one particular kind of, I suppose I'll just call them the large man ghost, that looks generic as fuck, which for me took me out of it a bit. And I generally don't really try to score films now when I watch them. At the point of watching them, I kind of sit and think about it and pontificate, over the night on it, and get an idea of the sort of score I want to give it. And then it normally comes down to when I actually start talking through the film, whether, here live on twitch.tv/Tesius with you guys, podcast listeners, or just, in general with friends or my girlfriend, that I then start getting a bit of an idea of the film. But the music was fine. Nothing really stood out. It wasn't like a particularly standout score, but it wasn't a terrible score. It was just fine. Performances are pretty decent. I think Wyatt Russell is. I think he can certainly find a good niche in horror, but I think he probably wants to, like his dad, sort of try his hand with the. Why pigeonhole yourself? Try your hand with the various sort of genres. But I mean, he did very well in an episode of Black Mirror from a few years ago, which is worth a watch. And here he does a pretty good job. He gets to play this pained character who seems to be finding a new lease on life, and goes through a few sort of moments in the film. But yeah, as a film, it's just all right. And I think I then need to, when I have an idea for the score of the film, I need to kind of think about what is that score like in relativity to other films, especially other films that I've just reviewed, and my enjoyment of those films. I'm going to give it a 5.5 out of 10. I'm actually going to revise that. I think 5. I'm going to give it a 5 out of 10. Because Backcountry was better. It was a lot better. Night Swim is just fine. It's all right, if it is on streaming or you fancy renting it, and if it's still only a $5, then a $5's not much. I mean, a $5 will get you an iced coffee in Starbucks and maybe a cookie, maybe if it's discounted. Who knows? But 5 out of 10 for Night Swim. It's all right. It's nothing to write home about. And that is it for the reviews. We are now going to go to our featured presentation. So we are going to be talking about legacy sequels in horror. So legacy sequels are essentially the point in time where quite a long amount of time has elapsed between entries in a horror film series, to the point where a new sequel is released that has some connection to at least the first film in the series. So it's not a remake, it's not setting up a new timeline, but it is in a timeline with the original film, at least the original film. Now, sometimes that does look like a remake on the face of it, and then it's revealed that there is a connection. Sometimes it's out and out clear that, hey, the original star is back. We're connecting things up. We're going back to the roots, and we're seeing where these characters are 20, 30, 40 years later. That's generally where this phenomena, or this term, kind of comes from. Now, it's not an especially new type of sequel. There's been, I guess you could say, legacy sequels going back long time. I'm not sure why on screen my name's disappeared. I will have a look for that. There we go. Yeah, there was Psycho 2, which you could say was a legacy sequel. A number of, like a decade or so, 2 decades, I think, had passed since the original film and the sequel, and Anthony Perkins returned for the first time of a little sequel series. But we haven't included that today. I've kind of focused a little bit more, for the most part, modern when talking about legacy sequels and where they fit. Now, Some fans love the prospect of a legacy sequel. They love the idea that, great, we're getting the original character back, or, ideally the original actress back. That's generally what they go for. I mean, sometimes due to nature, the passage of time, that isn't possible, unfortunately. But sometimes, we do get it where we get the originals back. Other times, it can be looked at as just a cheap cash grab, sullying the legacy of the film series, trying to alter the timeline of the film series, because some horror fans are a fervent bunch, and there will be occasions where a horror legacy sequel comes out that says, you know what, we are doing this as a sequel directly to the first film, because the timeline, the mythology has become so convoluted with the sequels, some of which were direct to video. So you have to wonder if the mainstream cinema going audience are going to know these changes and whatnot. Let's skip out on all those and let's just go directly to the first film. And that can work. Certainly can. But what can also happen is there's a loyal fan base there who get pissed off. Now, you can't always cater to the fan base. I think what sometimes happens, especially in this age of social media and everyone has a voice online, which I think it's fine. It's how that voice is used. Bounds can be overstepped, and people can find with their media, whether that's films, TV series, video games, that things don't play out how they would like, and it results into nasty bullying and death threats and all that nonsense, which is just ridiculous and over the top and completely unnecessary. And so I generally don't think you need to cater solely to a fan base. I think nods, little winks here and there, perfectly fine if they serve a purpose to the film or if they don't seem out of place. But I think the main focus has to be telling a good story, continuing a good story, one that works and isn't basically isolating your fan base, but isn't also isolating the cinema going public who, hey, maybe they like the odd horror film, but they wouldn't call themselves a horror fan. They haven't seen all 7 entries in a particular film series that's got a new one coming out. Because if you focus on things on that way, that, this film that's been going on for 30 years and has a deep mythology, the cinema going public, if they see Halloween of the October the 31st, Halloween, Friday the 13th, I Know What You Did Last, Nightmare, Part 12, that's not going to do big numbers at the box office, because your general public are going to be going, Part 12, what? They're not going to want to watch it, because they're going to, I haven't seen the other 11 parts. So it is a bit of a balancing act, and I do understand that. The first legacy sequel, which I think it's a little bit of a legacy sequel, it's a little bit of an adaptation, but I think it is one worth touching on, is Dr. Sleep. So, Dr. Sleep, 2019 American supernatural horror film, edited, written, and directed by Mike Flanagan. So this is an interesting film that I wanted to touch upon, because not only is it's an adaptation of another Stephen King novel called Dr. Sleep, but it is also a sequel to The Shining from 1980, the Stanley Kubrick film. Now, fans with a passing knowledge of Stephen King may go, but isn't... What? That doesn't make sense, because Dr. Sleep is a sequel to The Shining. Yes, and in terms of the book, yes and no. So the novel Dr. Sleep is a sequel to the novel The Shining. And in the novel The Shining, things occur that are changed up to a fair degree in the Stanley Kubrick film from 1980. You could say part of that is going to be due to limitations of technology at the time. There's a whole thing with hedge maze, animals running wild in the book. That wouldn't have worked without like shonky stop motion in the 80s. Wouldn't have been possible. But there were also things in regards to Jack Nicholson's performance as Jack Torrance, which seemed a bit in contrast to the portrayal of Jack Torrance in the book. A lot more of a pained individual, and it's a real internal struggle and a fight between his sanity and alcoholism and possession of this ghost. That's not necessarily so prevalent in the film, but I still think the film's incredible. I know Stephen King doesn't really like, maybe paraphrasing here, but doesn't really like the Shining adaptation that Stanley Kubrick did. And some fans, diehard fans of the book, won't like the film. Others will like the film and may not like the book. I mean, the book's pretty good. It's very good. But the essential point I'm trying to make is a number of things occur in the book that they didn't do in the film. They changed. Now, with Dr. Sleep, this is an adaptation of the book to an extent, but it is also a sequel to the previous film, the Stanley Kubrick film. So, in the Shining book, the Overlook Hotel gets burnt down due to the faulty boiler at the end. And in the Dr. Sleep novel, there is a bit of a showdown at the location where it's now a lookout point, but where the hotel was. So we have the hotel back in the film, the Dr. Sleep film, and that is the kind of location for the showdown, which then results in the fire occurring. So this kind of is a legacy sequel. Do we have anyone returning from The Shining, the film? I don't think so. I think most of them had passed or weren't age appropriate. Yeah, I mean, Jack Torrance has been recast from Jack Nicholson, because obviously he's much, much older now. Yeah, Scatman Crothers has been recast by Carl Lumbly. So it wasn't they weren't really in a position to have anyone returning from the original film. But as Eddie the Beast says in the chat, here's Johnny. But what we did get was this nice bridging of the gaps between adaptation and film sequel. It's a pretty good film. There's a couple of moments. There's a particular moment with the True Knot where they're torturing this kid that is, it's pretty full on. It's pretty haunting stuff. I mean, it's pretty full on in the book, and the book isn't that good. Like, I'm a big Stephen King fan, but the Dr. Sleep novel is not that great. It's one of the ones that when I finished it, I was like, oh, right, okay. I won't be returning to that anytime soon. But what we do have here is essentially, it's like almost 40 years later, return to that film series, paying without reworking the events that occurred in that film, but also being true enough to the book that this is adapting. Mike Flanagan is a big Stephen King fan, as is probably obvious with the number of adaptations he's done. He does a great job here, as he does with all his productions, but there is always just something that I just find is great in the moment, but doesn't leave me going, oh shit, I'm going to have to watch that again at some point. I never really get that with Mike Flanagan films. I'm not sure why. But Dr. Sleep is the first of our legacy sequels. Now, the next one we're going to talk about is a legacy sequel. We're not going to be talking about every single legacy sequel. I know on screen we've got Ellen Bernstein from The Exorcist Believer, but I don't feel it's appropriate to talk about that as we only reviewed it a few months ago. It's not been that long since we discussed it. We will talk, though, a bit about Scream 2022. I think we kind of have to, on account of part of the story here is the legacy sequels. With the Scream films, there's always this kind of through line of what are they aping at the time? Is it the world of social media? Is it the world of sequels in general, as with Scream 2? And with this instant, and to an extent Scream 6, they are kind of aping the legacy sequel. In terms of, we've got a new cast of characters, but we're bringing back some of the originals, and that's kind of your part and parcel of what a legacy sequel tries to be, whether successful or not. 2022 American slasher film, directed by Matt Bettinelli, Olpin, and Tyler Gillett, and written by James Vanderbilt and Guy Busick. Fifth installment in the franchise, and it's a direct sequel to Scream 4, which came out 11 years earlier. First in the series not to be directed by Wes Craven, who died in 2015. So with this installment, what kind of makes it stand out to me in terms of the whole legacy aspect is we not only have some of the returning cast coming in, we're passing over to the new class, Saved by the Bell, the new class, but we have some of the OGs returning to various levels of success. We also have some hidden away connections, which is part and parcel of the Scream series. I think, especially if you talk about reveals in Scream 2 and 3 specifically, these familial connections, which we find with straight off the bat with our main new character Sam Carpenter and her father, is something that's kind of been part and parcel of the Scream series throughout. So we've had that through line of connections with past players in the Scream playbook. And I think on the whole, this was fairly successful in that world of legacy sequels and really kind of hamming that up. I've talked before about Neve Campbell's role in this, that it just felt a bit kind of hammed on, which, it sucks. Neve Campbell, Sidney Prescott, is front and center of the Scream films. She is essentially front and center of this new poster, even though she only features really in the last half an hour or so. But when you're selling a Scream film, at least at this time, you think Neve Campbell. Dewey and Gale, I think their roles work quite well in this. Gale's always kind of like a tertiary character in the group, but they up the stakes by killing off one of the original returns, and that angered some people. But to be honest, I kind of thought you got to start doing that, because if you're gonna have these people constantly coming back into this scenario, then they've either got cinema armor or, well, that's it. They've just got cinema armor, or they don't get in themselves into too dangerous or life-threatening a scenario. And that then just makes things kind of a bit cheesy. So by killing off the old OGs occasionally ups the stakes. It shows that people are expendable. It's something they did in the Scream 2. People were pissed off when his name escapes me now, but when a particular character of the first film, Randy, when Randy got killed, it was shocking because he was such an endearing character in the first installment and again in the sequel. But when he got killed off, it showed that, well, anyone's expendable. Don't get too attached. And so I appreciated that here. I think this is one of the more successful approaches to the Legacy sequel. It doesn't feel so tacked on. We are continuing the film series. They've called it Scream as opposed to Scream 5. Now, whether that does seem like it was jumping on a bit of the trend of, we've got another Halloween called Halloween, and in the same year, I believe we've got a film we're going to be talking about soon with the same title as the original. And that's the thing that's kind of been going on around this period, sequels with the same title as the original film. not a trope that I like. I guess it's a way for your general public, money spending public, to go, oh, there's a new Scream film, cool. There's a new Halloween film, cool. They're not going into it seeing, oh, Scream 8. Right, okay, they're doing 8 of these now, are they? You know, it takes off the aging aspect, which, you know, I'm not saying that as in I agree with it, but I think trying to understand the logic of the titling of these films, maybe. But we're going to move on from Scream to another film with the same title as the film is a sequel to. Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Now, there's quite a few films that I could have discussed, ones you probably were expecting me to discuss, but I figured we'd go with this one, something a little bit different. 2022 American slasher film directed by David Blue Garcia with a screenplay by Chris Thomas Devlin from a story by Fede Alvarez and Rodo Saigues. It is the 9th installment in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre franchise, set several decades after the original film. The story focuses on the serial killer Leatherface targeting a group of young adults and coming into conflict with a vengeful survivor of his previous murders. So yeah, I'd forgotten how many Texas Chainsaw Massacre films there have been, because there's been quite a lot that are terrible. We've got a friend in the chat. Fran says, but if others were doing it, Scream would to be meta, which is a key part of the series. Well, yes, that is true. That does make sense. Still not a fan of the practice, but yeah, I guess it is in line with their approach. Their whole Mendus corpus. I don't know what I'm trying to say. I'm tired. It's in line with their whole approach. So with Texas Chainsaw Massacre, yeah, I'd forgotten how many entries there were in the series. Leatherface from 2017 that's terrible. I really thought that was a bad film, a real kind of cash grab film. With this entry, they kind of took the approach of going, okay, we're gonna do the Legacy sequel. We're doing a sequel to the original film, so you don't need to have seen all the other various sequels at whatever timelines they have, because the Texas Chainsaw Massacre series is... I kind of use the term series quite loosely, because the second film is the only kind of real sequel to the first film. We start running down the path of... So wait a minute, are these sequels, are they connected? Really? Not sure. I mean, Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3, there is a Leatherface there. Who is this family? What's their connection to the family that was in the first 2 films? The fourth film, probably the less said about that one, the better, because that is just a mess. So this is a series where I think that's probably not a bad idea to just ignore the sequels, because it's such a mixed bag. Let's just go directly to the first film. And they were clearly heavily influenced, I would say, by Halloween, because we've got Sally, I think her name's Sally, returning. It's a different actress, because I believe the original actress had passed away. Yeah, Marilyn Burns died in 2014. Sally Hardesty, I should say, who is now a Texas Ranger and was the only survivor of Leatherface's killing spree in 1973. So we're taking that approach of, okay, well, we've got the original survivor back, but they've been waiting for this moment, waiting for Leatherface to return. Now, with Halloween, and not to compare them, they're different film series, different franchises, different approaches to horror. But with Halloween, the 2018 Halloween, I should say, in terms of talking legacy sequels, We got a clear explanation, which was then shown how it occurred in Halloween Kills, as to why Michael has been locked up for this time. So it makes sense, being a legacy sequel set many years later, as to why this killer has not been prowling the streets, and also why our survivor is the way that they are, PTSD and survivalist mentality. That all makes sense. You know, it does make sense. With this film, okay, yes, we could gather the understanding that Leatherface isn't fully operational. I would say. But why they've basically been just hiding out, essentially hidden in the town for this long, is one thing. The other thing is they have done with Leatherface what they started doing, especially more so in Halloween Kills with Michael, in that they've made him ridiculously strong, like inhumanly strong. With Jason, and basically with Michael and Halloween Kills, they made him Jason, and they sort of made Leatherface Jason in this. The reason it makes sense with Jason, and I associate this more so with Jason from the Friday the 13th films, from part 6 onwards, where he's essentially a zombie. He is an inhuman being that is only unalive or whatever to kill. That is his sole purpose. That is what he does. That is what he do. With Michael, as far as we know, based on there being no explicitly stated supernaturalness, he is a man in his 60s. With Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the sequel to Texas Chainsaw Massacre, they've set it in the modern time, which I think in this instance was a mistake. I think if you're doing a legacy sequel with this sort of character and in this sort of world, set it in the 90s. Why? I understand from the story they're trying to basically I can't think of the term because my brain's not working tonight. When you upscale a desolate area, there's a term for it. I just can't think of it. That's essentially what they're doing. They're selling this location online, and it makes sense with the modern world of, you can now gentrify. That's the term just popped into my head. We can now gentrify this, completely, basically abandoned town. We've bought up all the shops and all the houses, and it can be, all modern all of a sudden. And that's essentially what sets off the story. But I just feel then that we're now in a situation where we've got a man of, who knows what his workout and dietary system has been. Gentrification, thank you, Fran, in the chat. Who knows what his setup has been. But as a man in his late 60s, because Texas Chainsaw Massacre was 74, I think, who is breaking bones like it's nothing, who is picking people up on chainsaws like it's nothing, who pulls someone out of a car and just slices their head off with a chainsaw, just like no issue. That, I think, could have been potentially better if it was just set 20 years later. Because we don't know how old Bubba is in the original film. He could have been 18. Just a big strapping boy. But when you jump ahead like this sort of time jump, it just feels a bit ridiculous. Like, I get from a horror perspective, you want to show, people want to see limbs being broken, faces being torn off, and all this stuff. I get that from the horror perspective, and I get you kind of have to throw logic out the window to a degree when you're watching horror. It's not, in most instances, highbrow and intricately written, for the mass stuff, I should say. But it just felt a bit like, okay, is there something supernatural going on here? Because otherwise, a man in his essentially late 60s, 70s is um is going around like a 20-year-old. It's a little bit ridiculous. As a film, I thought it was fine when I watched it. I mean, I didn't think it was brilliant. I don't think I reviewed it with a great score. It's got some good kills in it. There's some good fights, but it suffers from the problem of having no one likable really in it, which I don't understand why a number of sequels have this approach of just having pretty much purely unlikable quote unquote protagonists. Everyone was a douche in this. And I think even the lead woman, or one of the leads, who meets an end mentioned earlier on at the very end of the film, you kind of almost cheer when that happens because she's really irritating throughout a lot of the film. Yeah, and I wasn't surprised that this didn't do amazing, and I haven't heard any more on the sequel. I think there's been plans, but I don't think it's done enough to garner a sequel just yet. In terms of legacy sequels, though, it's I like to an extent what they're trying to do. I just don't think they need to set it in the 2020s. I think you don't need necessarily to have that modern aspect if you want to continue the story with, you know, Bubba and Sally. I think Sally, 20 years later, you know, being in her, I guess, mid-40s, dealing with this trauma, because essentially she could well have just lost her mind seeing what she saw and dealing with what she dealt with. And I think she has a cameo as I think her character is implied to be in a psychiatric unit in either the remake, at the end of the remake, or it might have been maybe the fourth part, I'm not sure. But I think that would have just been a little bit more of an interesting approach to my tastes anyway. So I've got two more legacy sequels. They're from slightly different eras, but there are franchises which I think fall into this category. And this is one that it kind of is only just a legacy sequel, I would say. Candyman. Now, we reviewed this when I watched it, I think during lockdown, I imagine. 2021 supernatural horror slasher, directed by Nia DaCosta, written by Jordan Peele, Wynn Rosenfeld, and DaCosta. It's a sequel to the 1992 film of the same name, and the fourth film in the film series based on the short story The Forbidden by Clive Barker. So, I have seen the original, and I have seen its first sequel. I haven't seen the third film. And the second sequel is called Day of the Dead. Well, the second film is Day of the Dead. The third film is not sure what that one's called. Can't remember. But yeah, it's with this film, it certainly felt for the most part like a remake for the majority of it. And I think it probably could have felt like a better film in my eyes, maybe if it stuck with that, with being a remake. We get a setting in initially the 70s Cabrini Green where we see a man with a hook for a hand get brutally murdered in front of a young boy because he'd been suspected of giving white children a razor blade hidden in a piece of candy. He's beaten to death by police, but later proven innocent when more cases of razor blades and candies appear. And when we jump to 2019 with Anthony McCoy, who's an artist living in Chicago with his girlfriend, gallery director Brianna Cartwright, who starts seeing and encountering supernatural occurrences, and also has had a sting from a bee after going around the Cabrini Green projects, which is just getting worse and worse and becoming more and more infected. And his kind of, I guess, his grip on reality is starting to slip, and he hears this tale of the Candyman in connection with the man who had been beaten to death in Cabrini Green in the 70s. So we're establishing a new setup for the world of the Candyman. The original Candyman film, I think, was set first off in the early 1900s, late 1800s, and that tale had followed down into the 1992, something like that. And that's where that then had its own kind of legacy and setup. So I didn't have any issues with setting a new mythology for Candyman. If it was going down the remake route, requel, it is a kind of a requel, remake, sequel, essentially, I would say. We are setting up this new mythology. Where this film, though, falls apart is it is a legacy sequel in terms of Tony Todd does feature briefly. We do also have a voice appearance from Virginia Madsen as Helen Lyle, who I think it would have been quite cool for her to feature in some capacity where appropriate. But right near the end, we then get this connection to the original film, and it is a bit of a tacked on connection. I mean, essentially, the legacy or the legend of the Candyman started with the original Candyman, Tony Todd's Daniel Robital. But then that legend over time, as with legends, gets attributed to different instances that have occurred at different points, and new legends are created from these instances. Now, I get that. I do get that. But from a legacy sequel perspective, it's kind of akin to... It's kind of akin to, I guess, when the news came out for Terminator Dark Fate that Edward Furlong was returning. And it was like, oh, okay. I mean, I don't know what shape he's in these days or what his health is like, but Edward Furlong was John Connor as a kid in Terminator 2. Great performance. Wasn't in Terminator 3. Instead, we had Nick Stahl. And Terminator 3 has a good ending, but I didn't really like it. It felt more a commercial sequel than Terminator and Terminator 2. But it felt like, okay, we're getting a legacy sci-fi action film, essentially, with not just Arnold returning, which is kind of a given, but we're getting Linda Hamilton back, legacy sequel. We're also getting Edward Furlong. But in that instance, Edward Furlong, it was his likeness applied to a child actor for 30 seconds at the start of the film. And that is kind of similar to this being a sequel to Candyman with Tony Todd returning, but he appears very briefly right at the end of the film. It feels like a little bit of a cop-out. It feels like fan service. We'll throw this in there. We've got Tony Todd back, but we'll throw him in for an appearance and a line right near the end of the film. So fans are like, oh yeah, there he is. But it's not an integral part of the story. It doesn't form the basis of the story. I kind of feel in those instances, you either bring them back to appear as their character and as part of the story, or focus in this new direction, set up your new legacy with your new Candyman. And those weren't my only issues with the film. I also feel that it fell apart very rapidly in the last 15 minutes or so when it's revealed what is really kind of going on to a degree. It doesn't necessarily answer all questions. There's a bit of a moment which I think is a little bit of a Jordan Peele trait, if I'm being honest. Something I noticed in Get Out, which I thoroughly enjoyed, but also in Us, which I didn't really think was that good, is kind of the Bond villain moment where the whole scheme is laid out and here is what's actually going on, whether it makes sense or not. Here is what is actually happening. You know, there's better ways to do a reveal rather than either playing a tape or a character saying this is actually what's going on. But we get that in Candyman, where the bad guy, William Billy Burke, who tells Anthony about the Candyman story, it's kind of one of those moments of, well, here's everything that's happened, and this is what's happening right now, and this is all the explanation that you need. It's a bit of an info dump, and it's a bit of a, oh, okay, I guess that makes sense. Yeah, I know. But yeah, I wasn't too fussed with this in terms of a legacy sequel, because to me it felt like just keep it as a remake. You got the title as if it was a remake. You can do your own story, which they've essentially done. You don't need to tie it into the original unless there's a reason to. And then finally, I couldn't do a legacy sequel series without talking about Halloween. I've mentioned Halloween briefly, but before people go, oh, fucking hell, I was going to talk about David Gordon Green's films again. No, I'm not. This time, I'm actually not. I'm going to talk about a different entry in the legacy sequels, and this one came in the 90s. Yeah, we did get legacy sequels in the 90s. I'm going to talk a bit about Halloween H2O, H20. 20 years later. I always call it H2O, although it is H20 because it's not the water symbol, although it is a bad title. 1998 American slasher film directed by Steve Miner and starring Jamie Lee Curtis, LL Cool J, Adam Arkin, Michelle Williams, Janet Leigh, and Josh Hartnett. So, this is a sequel, direct sequel to Halloween 2 from 1981. So, we've got 17 years difference here. And we've ignored Halloween's, I'm going to say Halloween 4 and 5 and 6 because 3 isn't, it's not, well, it's a Halloween film, but it's not part of the Michael Myers storyline. So it's ignoring those, and it's a direct sequel to Halloween 1 and 2. Something which Halloween 2 is ignored in the David Gordon Green films because Halloween 2 established the plot point that Laurie and Michael were siblings, and that is the reason why Michael's going after her, because he'd killed his sister originally on Halloween night, and he seems to have a thing for killing his family members. So with H2O, they decided, okay, well, we're going to ignore the whole Jamie Lloyd story arc, although originally there was going to be a mention of her having a daughter who died in a car crash, which would have been a little bit of a connection to the previous films, but that was either cut or wasn't filmed. It may have just been in the script. But we get a direct sequel to Halloween 2, reason being Halloween 2 obviously established them as siblings. And in this instance, that plays quite a key part. Now, this is the first time we're seeing the returning Jamie Lee Curtis, returning star of the original first two films, who is dealing with post-traumatic stress from the instant trauma of being almost killed twice on Halloween night by her brother. She finds out it's her brother. This is very typical of 90s films in terms of some of the music choices, which, I mean, 90s music is pretty good, but some of the music choices kind of age it in that period, and also some of the editing slashes. It's kind of got some similar editing slashes to Halloween 6, where there's a bit of an MTV feel to it. I don't necessarily mind that, but again, it kind of ages it to that period, which, I mean, it doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing, but it sets it tonally in that area. It's quite a short film, moves at a bit of a pace, but it does a pretty good job of continuing the story. Now, I imagine I would have been too young when this came out to really know anything about the Halloween films, especially the sequels. But I imagine some diehards may have been pissed off that it was just ignoring Halloween 4, 5, and 6. But I think in doing so, it brings the story back to the focus on the original character, which is Laurie Strode, and dealing with that trauma. Performance-wise, it does a pretty good job. It's a real hit and miss kind of sequel because it does run at quite a quick pace, almost too fast in places. And there is a bit of an issue with the masks in this film. There's about 6 different masks for whatever reason. I mean, there's even a moment where the mask is CGI. Don't know why, but we've we've established a new kind of. This is the thing with the Halloween series is we have a number of different timelines. There's the remake timeline, there's the H2O timeline, which is Halloween 1 to H2O Resurrection. There's David Gordon Green timeline of Halloween, Halloween Kills, Halloween Ends. It can be a bit convoluted. But with this legacy sequel, it was a huge hit. I think it really does show that if done right, and if not seeming like a cash grab, you can really capture people's imaginations. Jamie Lee Curtis is a huge actress, but she's always going to have that synonymous link to Halloween. And so even 20 years after this, when we got Halloween, David Gordon Green's, again, huge business because people want to see what's going to happen. Jamie Lee Curtis is back. It has that connection, and that gives it that kind of step up of gravitas. We're not doing the whole thing of saying this is a legacy sequel, Jamie Lee Curtis is back, but she dies in the first 2 minutes, or Jamie Lee Curtis is back, she's got a cameo right before the credits. You're continuing a story that's already been established without continuing it with a bunch of new random characters that are all unlikable. You've got your new characters, of course, but you're ultimately continuing on a story that's been established in the first and usually most famous entry. So H2O, I think, in terms of legacy sequels, does a pretty good job. Eddie the Beast says he has to finish the story, if you get what I mean. Well, Michael Myers' story is never finished. I was going to make a comment about the later sequels. I won't. I will hold my tongue. Anyway, Ghouls and Fiends, that's going to be it for another edition of the Ministry of Horror. Stick around just for a little bit. We'll have a little bit of a chat about bits and bobs off recording, but no watch parties, as they are no more, unfortunately. We'll have to figure out what else we're going to do stream-wise. Maybe I'll do some gaming at some point. I'm still not sold on what game to play or best way to utilize the setup. Maybe I just need to stop being lazy and use the Xbox with the stream card, capture card. Don't know. Anyway, thank you very much if you're watching live on twitch.tv/Tezius, TEZZIUS. Make sure to hit the follow button. Subscribe if you'd like. If you have a Prime subscription, you can use that it doesn't cost you any money. And that's all good. This will be going out on YouTube, so give the YouTube channel Ministry of Horror a subscribe over there. If you listen on podcast platforms such as Apple Podcast or Spotify, please give the show a follow. Share it around to all your friends. The Late Night with the Devil episode is just, the numbers it has done in comparison to the rest of the 76 or so episodes that Ministry of Horror have done is crazy. So I'm very thankful for the people who are still listening to the Late Night with the Devil review, or people that are just discovering the show thanks to the Late Night with the Devil review. It's very cool, and hopefully we have more opportunities like that in the future. So for those listening at home, goodbye, ghouls and fiends.